Welcome back to the Fantasy Trading Room, hosted by Faceoff Sports Network. And today we're going to be diving into Week 2 waiver wire pickups, diving into the top running back, wide receiver, quarterback, and tight ends. All guys you need to know and get on your team after Week 1. So with that said, let's dive right into it and start with the running backs. So let's kick things off with Tyler Allgeier, who is rostered in 43.6% of leagues. This dad's from ESPN, and we are going to be breaking down everyone that is below 50%. Obviously, if they're above 50, there's a pretty good chance that they're not available in your league anyway, so that doesn't help you. But in week 1, he had 24.4 fantasy points, outscoring Bijan Robinson, and that's because he had more carries than Bijan. I wasn't expecting Bijan to be amazing week 1. Yes, I still had him as a top running back, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Allgeier got some work as well, and the Falcons barely threw the ball. And that's exactly what happened. Allgeier had more carries, though, and had 2 touchdowns. He looked good. He had a 22-yard run, and he had 15 carries for 75 yards. Very solid. Bijan only had 10 for 56 and no touchdowns. And in the air, Robinson dominated. But at the same time, Allgeier still had 3 catches on 3 targets for 19 yards. So it's clear that Arthur Smith is going to run 2 running backs. Bijan can still be fantasy relevant, and Allgeier can still score points, especially early on in the season. I'm not sure how much they're going to use Allgeier down the stretch, but with Bijan still getting acclimated to the NFL, Allgeier could put up, 10 to 13 points on a week-to-week basis early on, and that's good enough for your flex spot and even a low-end RB2. If you're getting that kind of production off the waiver wire, you need to go out there and get it. But let's dive into our next player, who at number 2, we're going to go with Kenneth Gainwell. He's my number 1 waiver wire option for deeper leagues, as he's rostered in 21.5% of teams. The big news that propelled Gainwell to this role is Rashad Penny was a surprise scratch. He did not play at all. So that meant the backfield was split between Gainwell, DeAndre Swift, and Boston Scott. Now, I'm pretty surprised Swift isn't being used at all. I wasn't high on him this year. I don't like Swift. But at the same time, he's not really getting used in the passing game. He only had 2 targets. Gainwell had 4 targets as well. He's out-touching him there. But Gainwell isn't a phenomenal talent, but the Eagles are a good offense. So it just makes sense that you should pick up a running back 1 on an offense that is going to be high-powered and loves to run the ball. And let's get into number 3. We have Gus Edwards or Justice Hill if he is not available. I personally like Gus Edwards, even though Justice Hill did have the fantasy points because of the 2 rushing touchdowns. But if you look at the stats, Justice Hill had 8 carries for 9 yards. He just happened to get in on those 2 rushing attempts. But Gus Edwards looked very solid. He had 8 rushing attempts for 32 yards, and his longest run was 13 yards. So you can see that even though he is older, he still has it to a certain degree. Obviously, you're not expecting him to be a true league winner or become an RB1. But the Ravens have said that they want to stay in-house after J.K. Dobbins was injured. Gus Edwards is the current RB1 in the depth chart, so I'm not really sure why Justice Hill is going above Edwards. However, if you can get him and Edwards is already rostered, I don't mind him, but Edwards should be the guy going forward. But let's dive into the wide receiver rankings, as there was a ton of action going on in that sense. And my number 1 guy would probably be Zay Jones. So Zay Jones had a phenomenal game, and he is rostered in 28% of leagues before week 1. He had 16.5 fantasy points, and I am a Christian Kirk truther to an extent. I really like Kirk. I thought that he was going to take over Jones, but clearly not. Clearly, Kirk is on the field almost all the time in 2 wide receiver sets, and Kirk is exclusive from the slot. No, yes, I think Kirk has to get better than this. He can't really get much worse than 1.9 fantasy points. They're not just going to never use him when he's in the slot. He's talented. But at the same time, Calvin Ridley is the clear X. This is a good offense. Trevor Lawrence looked phenomenal. And Zay Jones had 7 targets and 5 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown with it. So if you can go out and get Zay Jones, he has the upside to be a flex player on a week-to-week basis. And especially in this Jaguars offense, I really love going with Zay Jones in a lot of leagues. So next we have Romeo Doubs, who's rostered in 19.1% of leagues, and he had 18.6 fantasy points against my Bears. That was a horrible game by the Bears defense, so I'm not sure how much we can look into it, but I don't want to talk about the Bears anymore because they just make me sad right now. So let's talk about Romeo Doubs for a second. Now, yes, he's probably not going to get the same level of work. In fact, it's almost guaranteed that he's not with the return of Christian Watson. Christian Watson is one of my favorite players in fantasy, and I think he's going to be a stud. However, Doubs is still going to be the wide receiver 2 on a Packers offense where the biggest question mark was Jordan Love, and he looked very good. Doubs was a little banged up as well, so he probably wasn't 100%. Let's keep that in mind. And the Packers offense was able to move the ball, and Love looked pretty solid. So seeing Doubs go out there and get 5 targets, convert on 2 touchdowns, he's not a player I'm exactly in love with, and I don't know if he can get back to the same level of production on a somewhat consistent basis like these other guys, but I think you can rely on him for 11, 12 points a game in your flex spot, so he's definitely worth a roster spot. So for our last guy, we Puka Nacua, and even though I am talking about him last, I would roster him ahead of Doubs. I just think that he's in 2.5% of leagues, so this is obvious for everyone. Doubs may not be. It's kind of like Doubs. If he's already on a roster, like it shouldn't really be worth talking about as much. But Nacua, for now, had 15 targets, 10 catches, 119 yards, and no touchdowns, which resulted in 21.9 fantasy points. And Nacua should be fantasy relevant for the next 4 games, next 3 games now with no Cooper Kupp. And even after that, I think he is going to be relevant because it's not like he's taking over that Cooper Kupp role exclusively where they're just force-feeding him the ball, he's playing in the slot and all that. No, it kind of looks like he's taking over that old Robert Woods role, which we saw was extremely productive in fantasy. Now, obviously, he doesn't have the ability to get to that wide receiver 1 level like Kupp did, but Woods was still a fantastic low-end wide receiver 2 most years. So Nacua, getting him at that price, I really like that. I think Nacua can really step into that role, and by the end of the season, he should be a phenomenal flex play. He should be a possible wide receiver 2 starter if the Rams' offense looks good as a whole, and they really surprised me. Stafford looked really good. I was betting on Stafford, but I wasn't sure if that offense could support even Nacua and Higbee because I thought Higbee was probably going to dominate, but he really didn't. So I'm all in on Nacua. I would go and buy some with my fab. Let's head over to the tight ends where we have Sam LaPorta, who's rostered in 34.3% of leagues, and he had a solid showing in opening kickoff against the Chiefs. He had 8.9 fantasy points, and this Lions offense looks phenomenal. Obviously, beating the Chiefs is a testament to how good they are, but I wasn't expecting LaPorta to get very involved early, but he drew 5 targets, 5 catches, 39 yards, and he looked great. I like LaPorta this year. I wasn't thinking he'd break out until later in the year, but 9 points in a tight end crapshoot is not nothing. If you have the space, it makes sense to throw a dart at LaPorta and hope he keeps improving. I'm not sure if he is going to take the steps to become a mid tight end 1 or even a low tight end 1 every single week, but he's definitely a guy that if you're really struggling on tight end, you can get him for that Lions upside, and hopefully he produces this offense and gets better every single week. And next we have Hayden Hurst, who I really like this offseason as well. Hurst had 15.1 fantasy points. He had 7 targets, 5 catches, 41 yards, and a touchdown, which was Bryce Young's first touchdown. He threw it into the stands. Very questionable, but no, I'm just kidding. Hayden Hurst. We have the Hayden Hurst Foundation live stream for mental health on Faceoff here, so big shout out to our guy. But he looked phenomenal, and I thought there was a real chance that Hurst could be the receiver number 1 on a decimated Carolina Panthers receiving room, and it's shown that he has. So going forward, I like Hurst. I think Hurst is right up there with LaPorta because you may not have the upside that you can get at the end of the season with Hurst, but right now I think he can outproduce LaPorta, and Bryce Young looked pretty solid. Bryce Young showed me enough. Obviously, it wasn't a great game by him, but he showed me enough where he's going to keep improving. He trusts Hurst right out the gate. So as Young keeps improving, the Panthers aren't as bad as they seem, but they're still not great. They're going to throw the ball, and it seems like they are going to favor Hayden Hurst out the gate. Let's dive into our first quarterback. We have Sam Howell at 11.2% rostered. He had 15.18 fantasy points, and I mean, that's not amazing by any means, especially against the Cardinals. That does worry me. But you have to keep in mind that Howell was very solid in the last season in that one game he played. He had about 17 fantasy points, And the Commanders just kind of look like a wreck. He wasn't great by any means, 19 for 31, 202 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But he showed he will run the ball with that rushing touchdown. Took off 2 times for 11 yards. Not amazing, but he has that rushing upside, which makes him much more valuable than any of the other players on this list. Sam Howell could easily get to 34 rushing yards a game. And if he gets a rushing touchdown as well, he has the upside that none of these other pocket passing quarterbacks can touch on the waiver wire. I expect them to keep improving. It was a rough outing week 1, but we also saw rough outing from many other players. So I'm not really too worried about Howell. He still had a solid game, 15.18 fantasy points. So I don't mind Howell. Again, if you're really struggling at quarterback, I'd say go pick up Howell. But our next guy, Jared Goff, is also a solid option. He is rostered in 48.6% of the league, so not everyone, but he had an all right performance week 1. And this is why I actually have Howell above him, because he only had 14.02 fantasy points in a game that the Lions beat the Chiefs. I mean, he was solid, 22 for 35, again, 250 yards, 1 touchdown, but he doesn't have that rushing upside that Howell has, which allowed him to still get outproduced by Howell, even though he had a much better game on paper and through the air. But nonetheless, the Lions have a very good offense, so I'm looking to get a piece of that with Goff. If you're really struggling or in a 2 QB league, Goff can be a high-end QB2 for most teams, so I don't mind it. I don't think he has the upside that a lot of these players have, and I don't love the pairing with Goff, but at the same time, if you're really weak at quarterback, say you're just really, really decimated by injuries, and you decided not to grab a quarterback until late in the draft, and he's just absolutely trash, Goff, you can plug in your starting lineup, and he's not going to be a liability for a team. He's not going to be amazing, but at the same time, that's not necessarily what you need when you're starting Jared Goff. You need him to get 15, 16 points a week and just help your team stay afloat. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Fantasy Trading Room. We are going to be trying to do at least 2 videos / podcasts a week. Tuesday, we are now going to be dropping our waiver wire video. And then Saturday, we are going to be doing the podcast type video with guests and talking about rankings for the week and the fantasy landscape in general. But I hope you guys enjoyed this short video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. And if you're looking for more short form edited content, be sure to come back every Tuesday, get your waiver wire rankings, check out the Fantasy Trading Room and the Face Off Sports Network, and I'll see you guys in our next video.